Alright, so we're starting our photosynthesis unit, or cellular energy unit, with photosynthesis. Um, as we learned in our first unit, all living organisms need energy. There are two types of organisms: those that make their own energy, like plants, prokaryotes, some bacteria, algae, are known as autotrophs. Um, our other organisms that need to consume something to have energy are animals, most of our multicellular organisms, and they're referred to as heterotrophs. So heterotrophs have to consume autotrophs first, and autotrophs make their own energy. The type of energy that is used most in cells is known as ATP. ATP stands for adenosine triphosphate. We know that it's one of our nucleic acids that we learned. So it has the nitrogen base adenosine, a sugar, ribose in this case, and three phosphates, which is our phosphate groups. It is adenosine triphosphate because it has three. And the third phosphate is the one that actually helps ATP have a lot of energy. So it's meant to be more like a short-term energy, and it produces the energy by breaking off that third phosphate. When it breaks off, it becomes ADP, which is adenosine diphosphate, di meaning two, so that's why it only has two phosphates. In the cell, though, it can still be used to break apart the second bond from the first and create some energy, but it's not going to be as impactful as the third group of phosphates. So most of the time, ADP is stored into the cell and used to then later bond with another phosphate to create ADP again. And it's just a continuous cycle that we'll learn between the two types of photosynthesis. So for the most case, think of ATP as your full battery. ADP is low, which will be charged by gaining another phosphate through our Calvin cycle. Now, when do cells use ATP energy? Typically, it's an active transport, which we learned last unit. That's just moving large molecules, or charge, so any of our cations and anions across that membrane. Remember, as well as any polar molecules. It's also used up in the synthesis of nucleic acids, so making our genetic information like DNA and RNA. We'll learn more about that next unit when we're talking about mitosis. And as well as movement. In order for a cell to move, it does use up some energy, and organisms that exercise as well. Now, there are two types of energies that are used in the cell. ATP is your short-term energy, quickly breaks off that third phosphate and releases energy. Glucose, though, is used more as a storage. This is because cells want to have a small supply of ATP since they want to keep a small size for their cell specialization. So that's why they end up using ADP later to make more ATP by breaking down glucose. And that's also just because glucose is better for storing and it can produce more energy than ATP in the long term. Now, photosynthesis overall is just the process of converting light energy into biochemical energy. This occurs through a chemical reaction. Like any other chemical reaction, we have our reactants, which is what goes into the reaction first. In this case, CO2 and H2O have to be present in sunlight, which is our energy source. CO2 stands for carbon dioxide, and H2O stands for water. Those two reactants have to go at the start of the reaction with sunlight, and will produce C6H12O6 and O2. The C6H12O6 is just glucose. That's one of the carbon compounds we learned. And then O2 is oxygen gas. That's a byproduct that occurs when the water molecules break apart. And remember that oxygen is a diatomic, so it has to survive in a pair. That's where there's two oxygen molecules bonded together. The overall balance equation for photosynthesis is that in order to produce one molecule of glucose, you need 6 carbon dioxide molecules and 6 water molecules. They produce 1 glucose and the byproduct of 6 oxygen molecules. You don't have to know how to balance it. You'll learn more about balancing in chemistry. You do need to memorize this one equation, though. It'll be in a lot of your quizzes and tests. In order to remember the reactants and products, the easier acronym you can remember is COWS GO. Cows would have carbon dioxide, water, and sunlight, and then they go by producing glucose and oxygen. Now, where does photosynthesis actually occur? We learned in our third unit that chloroplasts are located in cell plants. That is the actual site of photosynthesis since they contain chlorophyll. Chlorophyll is a pigment found in chloroplasts. Pigments are used to help absorb light. In this case, the wavelengths of lights that they absorb are more red and blue, and they reflect green light, which is why most plants appear green to us. What do I mean by that? It's just overall wavelengths. Most lights have different types of wavelengths. Chlorophyll specifically has two types, chlorophyll A and chlorophyll B. They absorb better blue and red light, so they absorb that type of light, store it in as energy, and they reflect green. You don't even know the specific types of chlorophyll. If you're looking to be in AP Bio, you'll learn more about that in more detail next year. Now, what happens during daylight saving times, or winter and fall, is as the days get shorter, plants produce less chlorophyll since there's less sunlight. That decrease in production of chlorophyll decreases the overall pigment, so they don't have as much of the green reflecting and they don't have as much of their energy stored. This allows us to see more of the other pigments that are stored in the plants. So we see adenosine, which is our red, and the carotenoids, which are yellow and orange. The overall parts of a chloroplast, remember that, like the mitochondria, it's one of our organelles that follow the symbiotic theory, where they have their own genetic information, because people said that years ago it used to be its organism on its own that later got engulfed by a plant cell and then started evolving into the plant cell as well. So it does have its own membrane. It has an outer membrane, an inner membrane space, and then an inner membrane. Within the inner membrane, the sac-like ovals that you see are the thylakoids. One thylakoid is where they have chlorophyll, which is why photosynthesis occurs in the thylakoids. When you have a stack of them like you do here, they're referred to as a grana or a granum. Now, photosynthesis has two parts. We have a light-dependent reaction and light-independent. Light-dependent has to occur with a light source, so sunlight. That occurs in the thylakoid membrane since they contain the chlorophyll, which absorbs that sunlight. This area over here that's kind of like a lighter greenish yellow, this is referred to the stroma, and this is where the light-independent reactions, or the Calvin cycle, occur. So this is outside of the thylakoids. In the chloroplast, you'll have many different types of thylakoids and granums stacked together, but the stroma is where the light-independent occurs. Now, what occurs in the actual membrane of the thylakoid? Typically, you have your energy coming in. As the energy from the sunlight comes, water is broken off, so we have an increase of hydrogen ions since the oxygen is the byproduct. We also have electrons that are being carried in through the electron transport system. With the increase of hydrogen ions, we have more of a positive charge inside the membrane. To help balance it, it's why the electron is used up. So NADP plus absorbs that electron to help transfer it through the cell membrane, and then it joins with the hydrogen ions to later help transform ADP back into ATP to use for energy. Now, the electron carriers in the chloroplast are NADP plus and NAPDH. All that really means is it's nicotinamide adenine dinucleotide phosphate. I will not ask you guys to know the exact name. Just know that the acronym is NAPDH. That's once it has the electron, and then when the electron is used up, it releases it back into ATP. So then you recycle the NADP plus into the light dependent. Factors that could affect photosynthesis. So one of the reactants is water, as well as carbon dioxide. If you have a decrease or shortage of any of the reactants, it would decrease the overall output. So shortages of water would cause a decreased rate in photosynthesis. Same with temperature. Certain proteins and enzymes that are used to help facilitate the process in the membrane of the thylakoids would denature if the temperatures got too hot or too cold. And then overall light intensity as well. We can see that right now during our daylight saving times. There is less light, so it's causing the plants to lose their chlorophyll since they're not being able to produce photosynthesis at the same rate. So overall, a decrease in light will decrease the rate of photosynthesis. Now, as I mentioned, there are two parts of photosynthesis. We have a light dependent, which has to have a light source, and light independent, which is sometimes referred to as the dark reactions or Calvin cycle, since it was discovered by Dr. Calvin. Now, the light dependent reactions occur in the thylakoid membrane, so that's inside the thylakoids where the chlorophyll is. They have to occur in the presence of the light, and they take in the water and sunlight. Water and sunlight are taken in, and then the water molecules are broken up. When those bonds break, they release oxygen gas as a byproduct, and then they cycle the NADPH and ATP out to the stroma. That's because that is used up in our light independent reaction, which can occur at any time. Light isn't required for this part of the reaction, but typically, because of the way that the plants are structured, their leaves, certain plants have stromas, not stromas, they have stomata under the leaves that help release and absorb carbon dioxide. Because when they are open, they can also have a chance of releasing water, and plants don't want to release water. They always want to hold on to the extra water. During the daytime, they typically remain closed. Because they can't absorb the carbon dioxide during the daytime, most of the time light independent occurs at night. Does not mean it can't occur during the daytime as well. Since it doesn't need sunlight, it can occur throughout any time of the day. Typically, they take up the ATP and NADPH that is given off of the light-dependent reaction, as well as carbon dioxide that's absorbed, to then create glucose by taking up that, by breaking down the glucose, and they create ADP plus a phosphate to bond it back into energy and give off NADP plus since it releases that hydrogen ion. Now in your diagram, you'll see here, this left side is our light dependent reaction. So light typically will always be diagrammed as a ray. Light has to be present, and water is then taken in. This bulge right here is a granum, so it's a stack of your thylakoids, and it's given off oxygen. The ATP and NADPH is then cycled through to the stroma, and then it occurs in the light independent reaction. Once we have this, it absorbs carbon dioxide and then gives off glucose. ADP plus P and NADP plus are then recycled again to the light independent. That's why these two work hand in hand, back and forth, cycling these two. Now, you guys can look at this video individually. It'll give you more of a summary of the overall processes. And then if you haven't already, make sure that you guys complete your photosynthesis lab, your photosynthesis one-pager, and the exit ticket. All of this is located in our Schoology folder, day 2. And if you have any questions, just let me know.